Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking into, well, a case that gripped everyone, the massive manhunt for Travis Decker. He was the only suspect in those awful murders of his three daughters, Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia.
Yeah, a truly tragic case. And the search itself, it went on for months. Huge resources involved. What we have today are sources detailing how that search finally ended with the discovery of remains, believed to be Deckel's.
Right. And our mission here is to really dig into the details, the evidence that came out with that discovery, because it forces a total rethink of what actually happened during those 3 months.
Exactly. It challenges the narrative that was built up. So the public perception versus, well, the forensic and geographical reality.
Okay, so just to quickly set the scene again, the girls were reported missing May 30th, 2025. A custody exchange gone wrong.
And then just days later, June 2nd, the terrible discovery. Their bodies found near Decker's abandoned truck, Rock Island Campground, that's about, 17 miles west of Leavenworth, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And that spot became ground zero instantly. The medical examiner confirmed homicide, suffocation. And the link to Decker was, well, pretty much immediate. His DNA on the plastic bags, and crucially, only his DNA on the zip ties used to bind them.
So he went from missing person to essentially the target of a nationwide manhunt, capital murder.
Overnight, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The manhunt, it lasted months, right? And it was built on this idea of who Decker was. What was that assumption driving this huge response?
It all came down to his background. His resume, really. That dictated everything. He was 32, an Army veteran, served 2013 to 2021. That alone raises flags for survival capabilities.
But it wasn't just any service, was it? There was a specific detail that really ramped things up for law enforcement.
That's right. The key thing was his time with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Elite. Special operations capable. He even had a deployment to Afghanistan.
So when police hear Ranger, they're thinking, what? More than just camping skills.
Oh, way more. They're thinking high-level evasion, counter-tracking, navigation in extreme terrain, living off the land, operational security, basically someone incredibly difficult to find in the wilderness.
And they knew he'd done this before, lived off-grid for months at a time. Up to 2.5 months, the sources say.
Exactly. So they weren't just chasing someone lost in the woods. They were potentially hunting someone who saw those mountains, the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest, as, an advantage, a place to disappear.
Right, he knew that environment.
Which explains the massive scale of the response. You had the U.S. Marshals leading a task force, the FBI involved, Border Patrol, the WSP Washington State Patrol, the National Guard, loads of local agencies. Over 100 people at times.
Focused on this huge area. Hundreds of square miles of really tough, mountainous country.
Absolutely. And they threw everything at it. Drones, helicopters with thermal imaging, swiftwater rescue teams for the rivers, and canine units. Lots of dogs tracking dogs, and, importantly, human remains detection dogs, too.
All of this effort, this massive expense, based on the idea that Decker, with his skills and that 3-day head start, was likely long gone, miles away.
That was the logical assumption, the probability. And then you have the terrain itself. Sheriff Mike Morrison kept emphasizing that the environment was the biggest obstacle.
Dense forest, thick undergrowth, steep ravines.
Yeah, it slows everything down, it makes searching incredibly difficult, which, ironically, reinforced the idea that a skilled guy could stay hidden out there for a long, long time.
So that was the story. The skilled survivalist versus the massive dragnet playing out across the Cascades. But then came the discovery. And this is where, as you said, the narrative completely shifts.
Completely. It just collapses the whole timeline. The remains were found, eventually, months later, near Grindstone Mountain, pretty remote spot, about 4,000 feet elevation.
Okay, remote. But the key fact, the one that changes everything, is how close it was to the start point.
Exactly, that's the stunner. How far from the Rock Island campground where the truck and the girls' bodies were?
Give us the number.
It was approximately 0.74 miles.
0.74. Less than a mile.
Less than a single mile. Think about that. The distance that justified this enormous multi-agency, month-long search was less than a 15-minute walk, maybe a bit longer in that terrain, but still incredibly close.
So that just doesn't compute with the initial premise. If he was that close, how did they miss him for 3 months while searching huge areas much further out?
Well, it goes back to that profile, right, and probability. Law enforcement had to act on the likelihood that a ranger with a head start would put distance between himself and the scene. That's where they focused the initial intensive efforts.
Oh, they were looking far afield because that seemed the most probable scenario.
Precisely. The only way he could be that close and not be found is if he basically didn't get anywhere. The proximity screams that his flight ended almost immediately. He was likely dead or incapacitated right around June 2nd, shortly after leaving the truck.
So suicide, maybe an accident, exposure. Something stopped him right at the start.
That's the strong implication. And the reason he wasn't found sooner, the terrain again.
Right. Sheriff Morrison confirmed the spot was outside the first few search zones, even though it was close.
Yeah. So you had specialized teams, dogs, drones, operating relatively nearby, but the density of the forest, the canopy, the undergrowth, it just swallowed him up.
It acted like perfect camouflage, basically.
Exactly. Static camouflage. Nature did the hiding, not necessarily Decker's evasion skills beyond that initial disappearance into the woods. The search was hard because the place was hard to search, not because he was actively outmaneuvering them for months.
Okay, so the location points to an early end. What about the condition of the remains? Did that back this up?
It did, very strongly. The state of the remains was described as severe decomposition.
Which fits the time frame.
Right.
Early June discovery to early September.
Yes.
3 months exposed to the elements in the Cascades during summer.
Perfectly consistent, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was more. They specifically mentioned a spread of the remains, which indicated animal scavenging, post-mortem animal activity. So that level of decomposition, plus the animal interference over a 3-month period, it makes it highly, highly improbable he was alive for any significant part of that manhunt. He almost certainly didn't make it out of early June.
So the forensics, the timeline from the body's condition, lines up perfectly with the location, that short distance. It paints a very different picture.
It does. It creates this strong circumstantial case that the chase was over before it really began. But, law enforcement still had to be incredibly careful.
How so? What did they say officially?
The sheriff's office was very precise. They said something like, while positive identification has not yet been confirmed, preliminary findings suggest the remains belong to Travis Decker.
Even with the location. And they found personal items too, right? Clothing consistent with what he was wearing.
Yes, strong indicators. But legally, you need that biological proof. So they emphasize that definitive ID relies on DNA analysis. The WSP Crime Lab is rushing that now.
Gotcha. Procedural necessity. Make it airtight. No room for doubt later.
Exactly. You close the case based on science, not just strong probability, especially in a case this serious.
Okay, so finding the remains provides that procedural closure. The manhunt is effectively over. The suspect is accounted for. But there's still a piece missing, isn't there? The how and why of his death.
Right. And this is where things get, well, potentially permanently fuzzy. The cause and manner of death caught in Maud, that's up to the medical examiner or coroner.
And given the state you described, severe decomposition, scattered by animals, the determination must be incredibly difficult.
Exceptionally. Soft tissue is gone. You're dealing mainly with skeletal remains. Trying to find definitive evidence of, say, suicide versus an accidental fall or exposure, it's tough.
How would they even tell? If he shot himself, maybe the bullet damage. But what about other methods, or a fall?
Well, they look for specific types of fractures or marks on the bones that happened around the time of death. Perimortem trauma, a bullet might leave characteristic damage. A fall could cause certain fracture patterns. A knife might leave cut marks on bone.
But couldn't animals do similar damage? Chewing on bones.
That's a huge challenge. Postmortem scavenging can absolutely mimic certain types of trauma. Gnaw marks can look like cuts or scrapes. Breakage from animals moving the bones could look like fractures.
So separating what happened at death from what happened after death, almost impossible sometimes.
It can be. If there isn't clear, undeniable evidence like a bullet embedded in bone or a very specific fracture pattern inconsistent with a fall, the medical examiner might have no choice but to rule the manner of death as undetermined.
Which leaves that question mark.
Exactly. You have procedural closure. The person responsible for the murders is no longer a fugitive, but you might lack that full narrative closure for the family, for the public. Knowing how he died, was it a final act of intent, like suicide, confirming the murder-suicide scenario, or was it something else? That ambiguity could remain.
And the authorities are still treating the underlying murder investigation as active until everything is finalized, right?
No. Correct. Sheriff Morrison made that clear. The focus is still the criminal case until they've methodically ruled out all possibilities, however remote, like any third-party involvement. They have to follow procedure to the letter before officially closing the murder investigation itself.
Makes sense. They can't just assume.
No, they have to prove it, forensically and legally.
So when we boil this all down, the big takeaway from this deep dive seems to be this huge irony. This massive, months-long high-tech manhunt was driven by the profile of this elite, evasive fugitive.
But the reality, revealed by the evidence, was that the search's length and difficulty were dictated almost entirely by the terrain hiding a body that was less than a mile from the starting point.
He was never really on the run in the way everyone assumed.
Seems unlikely. So what does it all mean? I think the ultimate irony is how Decker's own skills indirectly shaped the outcome. His ranger background and survivalist reputation demanded that huge, wide-ranging search. But those same skills likely led him into the very type of dense, difficult wilderness that then acted as a perfect, immediate vault for his remains.
The environment he was trained to master essentially trapped him, or at least trapped the evidence of his fate, for months.
Precisely. The high-tech search was geared for a mobile target covering vast distances, but it was defeated, at least initially, by the simple, static concealment offered by nature just a few hundred yards away.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How the fear of a capable fugitive, the narrative built around that fear, can shape a massive response that might be looking in completely the wrong direction, while the simple, brutal reality lies hidden practically under foot, obscured only by trees and time.
That contrast is definitely the lingering element here, the sophisticated effort versus the raw power of the natural environment.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.